Good afternoon or good morning to those of you on the other side of the world. Thanks for joining this very busy webinar this afternoon where we're going to be looking at layers. So layers is a big subject. We will struggle to squeeze everything into an hour, but I won't go over an hour. So hopefully you'll see today as a way to inspire you to look at the potential of the tools and apply that to your own work. So we're trying to squeeze in as much as possible without being confusing and set you off on the road to working with layers or getting the most out of them yourself. Before we get to the content, just a couple of housekeeping things. Hello to those of you on Facebook and YouTube. Please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. They will come straight through to me here as well. For those of you in the webinar room, just so you know, let's just bring up this picture. If you want to ask a question, it's probably better if you put it in the Q&A tab. You can already see from the chat room that it's definitely very busy. So do just keep your questions out in the Q&A room, because not only am I in the webinar, we've also got my colleague Diego, who's also helping out in the webinar room, Yulia, who's out on Facebook, and Diego's also keeping an eye on YouTube as well. So there's three of us who have your attention today. So we do our best to answer as many questions as possible. If you're not interested in chatting and all those kinds of things, you can give yourself a bit more real estate by clicking that small arrow, and that will just collapse down that panel and give you a bit more space for Capture One. All right, so without further ado, let's get to the subject in hand. So today's all about layers, as I said in the introduction. So first of all, what's the purpose of a layer? So really the purpose of a layer is to target your adjustments to a particular spot. Now generally when we think about layers, we tend to categorize it in dodging and burning, like selective brightening or darkening adjustments, but it really can be a whole myriad of things. It could be localized sharpening, could be localized noise reduction, could be the way we do a gradient or a vignette, which we call a radial mask, and so on. So try not to limit your scope on what layers can actually do. It is rather broad and extensive. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a second. The way we create layers can also vary greatly as well. So we can draw a layer or a mask in, I should say, using a brush. We can use it or create it with a gradient mask. We can use a radial mask. We can ask Capture One to analyze the brightness of the photo and create the mask based on luminosity as well. So there's all kinds of different ways that we can create and shape these masks as well. We will try to cover as many of those as possible too. We'll start off simple and then we'll build it up a little bit so you can see the greater power as well. Now, in terms of you guys asking questions, I won't be able to get to every single question, I'm afraid. So what I'll do is I'll pick out some of the common threads that I see whizzing past me on the screen to try and cover off. And as I said, Diego and Yulia will do their best to answer as well. So here's a fantastic shot on screen. This is from Miloc. Sorry, Miloc, I forgot your surname, but Miloc is currently being featured across our social media channels. If you've been present across our channels, you would have known just previously we had a competition around red. Now we've switched to green. No prizes for guessing what the next color is going to be. But this is one of Miloc's shots that he shot for us around that subject. And it was around lockdown and food, as you can probably guess. So this is just a great example of how Miloc has exercised layers just to selectively adjust parts of the shot. So if I hold my Option key down and click on the reset button in layers, then you can see that's without his layers and then that's with his layers. So he's very much used it for local density and color changes and so on. If we actually look at the before, this is actually as it came out of camera and as he's done his edit. So that is, you know, a brilliant example of just what you can do in Capture One. Hopefully we can get Maciek on a live session and he can take us through his shoot and editing process, because they're really fascinating shots. Anyway, so layers allow you to target the adjustment to a specific part of the shot. So let's go through some simple examples and build up as we go. All right, so let's start off with something easy. Just going to turn up my screen brightness so I can see what I'm doing and wonder why I was looking into abyss. So let's just start with something easy which helps us think about drawing masks with a brush, how the brush dynamics change, or the settings of the brush, how does that affect the photo, and a few other bits as well. So we've got a nice food shot here, relatively shallow depth of field. Let's just hide my browser with the Command B. Relatively shallow depth of field, so the focus is falling off here, but we've got a nice sharp area. So what if we wanted to just target a bit more sharpening and a bit more, you know, accuracy, sharpness or whatever, just on the main part of our subject? So an easy way to do that would be just to do a quick layer. So we're going to do this in the most basic sense. So in our layers panel over here, and you'll see the layers panel sits in the color tool tab, the exposure tool tab, and the details tool tab by default. Now, as we're going to be working mostly in this tool tab today, I've just made this tool a little larger. So if you look on the three dots, you can go small, medium, and large like so. So this, as we might be working with several layers, this just helps you guys to see it a bit easier. So I'm going to grab my brush down here, this icon, and then move over to the shot. Let's just zoom in a touch. And straight away you can see the cursor change to those two concentric circles. What does that actually mean? Well, the central circle is where my mask is at 100%. And if you think as we move out to the outer circle, that's where the mask feathers down to 0. So that gives us a nice soft edge. So if I right click, this brings up our brush settings panel. Now for this short exercise, we're only going to worry about the first two adjustments, which is size and hardness. So let's give ourselves a fully hard brush. I'm going to lose that outside circle and let's make it a bit bigger and then just draw on the shot. Now, why can't I see anything? Because I haven't activated to see the mask. So remember, the mask will be shown in red when I press M on my keyboard. So just a simple toggle with M on my keyboard, like so, just turns the mask on and off. So that's just simply indicating where I've drawn my mask. Now, if we change that first parameter hardness, let's just drop that down a bit and do another drawing, you can see the difference of how the edge of that brush is feathered off. Generally, what we're looking to do is try to make masks as believable and natural as possible, because you don't want to be looking at a shot and seeing it super obvious that someone's kind of done a bad mask around the edge of something. So two simple things that we can do. Now, I would say a golden rule of masking is not to get too obsessed with trying to cut perfectly around things all the time. Sometimes it makes sense, like if you're doing interiors and you want to work around a window, to change the density of the light coming through the window, you would want to be accurate, but generally you want to keep it nice and soft and subtle as we go through this exercise as well. So I'm going to delete that layer so we can do a proper one with minus, and then hit plus once more. Let's just call this salmon, as we're going to do a little work on this guy. Let's zoom out a bit. And I'm just going to do a quick mask around the edge. So I'm not going to be super accurate, but nothing too fancy, just in this area like so. Once again, M, hide your mask. Let's zoom in to 100% and then go to my sharpening tool and then just pull up the sharpening a bit like so. We could also combine in a bit of structure. Remember, your local adjustment or layer doesn't have to be restricted to one tool. It can be a combination of tools. So now if we turn this layer on and off with the checkbox, then you can see what's going on. I've pushed it a little bit harder than I perhaps normally would, just so you guys can see on screen a bit easier. Now, the nice thing is we've kind of created ourselves a sharpening brush. So if I go over to this area and just drag over the shot like so, then we can kind of apply our sharpening anywhere else. So if we go to the graphic on the knife here, we can sharpen that up a bit of the lettuce and so on. So just a very simple premise of how to use a layer to add one or two simple adjustments. All right, I can see lots of questions whizzing past about shortcuts and a few other bits and pieces. So when you're adjusting the brush, what I will do in this webinar is always right click and show you this panel, mostly so that you can see what's going on. Now, there are shortcuts. There's a few different ways you can do it. You could use your square brackets. So with my square brackets over here, if I tap those, then you can see the brush size getting smaller and bigger. If we do shift square bracket, that will change the hardness. Maybe a slightly faster way to do it is if you hold down these two, at least on a Mac it's Control and Option, and then we drag. Now the reason why I've put my pen down and dragging with the trackpad is so that you can see the little heads up display and notice that the cursor stays static. So if I drag left and right, that makes my brush bigger and smaller. If I go up and down, that changes the hardness. With your third spider finger over here, if I hit shift, then we can change our opacity and flow by dragging left and right. More on those adjustments later. Now sometimes with Wacom, I need to sort my drivers out. The little heads up display doesn't show up. So that's why I wanted to show you without the Wacom. So yes, Jim, that was Jim asking that. And giving a tip, there are various shortcuts. There's more layer shortcuts. I'll mention them as we go through as well. Okay, let's up the game a bit now that you're aware roughly what's possible with layers. And let's just go to this shot. We're going to reset this back to normal. Nice wildlife shot from my buddy. Oh, let's hide overhead camera. Nice wildlife shot from my buddy Chris Gibbs out in Alaska. Great shot, pretty close out of camera. So why would we want to use a layer on this shot? Sometimes it's worth thinking about layers when you come outside of the scope of what's possible with selective adjustments. And when I say selective adjustments, I mean things like the highlight slider, the shadow slider, and so on, obviously are targeted to different densities of the shot, but sometimes that's not enough. So in this example, if we pull the highlights down, that's great. I can just improve the brightness here. Now, underneath his legs, his or her legs, shouldn't discriminate, I just want to lift the shadows a little bit. It's getting a bit too dark. So I think fair enough, I'll pull up the shadows. That's fine for Mr. or Mrs. Bear, but then it's also having a pretty broad effect to the rest of the shot. That's not great. What about if I pull the blacks up? Also the same effect. So even though those are what I would call targeted slider adjustments, we still need to narrow that range further. Now there's two different ways we could do this. We could do this the way that generally we tend to do the first time that we use layers and then realize it wasn't such a good idea, and then we can do it in a slightly more sophisticated way. So you saw how we did it with the tuner, as someone has just corrected me. I saw we just drew a quick rough mask on and added some sharpening, and that worked just fine. If we tried to do the same thing with this, it might not be as good, and also we don't quite know what adjustments we want. So if I grab the brush and then just start guessing where I think I want to have my adjustment, so it was kind of around here and maybe down here a bit. Let's try that. And then I can go back to my sliders, high dynamic range, pull open the shadows, and then maybe the blacks a bit, and so on. It's okay, but it's not great because there's no finesse to the mask itself. We've either masked it or we haven't masked it. So this is where the all-important parameter of flow comes into play. And if you can really get your head around how flow works and use it proficiently, then it just makes masking so much better, faster, and easier. So let's do this in a slightly different way. So we're going to kill that layer, and we're going to click and hold on our plus button and choose this option, which is called the new field adjustment layer. So that will add a layer. If we press M, then you'll see that's the mask over the whole shot. So we've literally added a mask over the whole shot. Why on earth would we want to do that? A couple of reasons. Color grading, which if we've got time, we can talk about later. Another reason, if you want to separate out your adjustments into different layers, because we can also vary our opacity with this guy over here, this slider. So we can vary our opacity of our adjustment. So it gives you a bit of flexibility post adjusting to lessen or strengthen the result. But for this case, I'm going to fill that layer as we saw, and now I'm going to dial in the kind of adjustments that I think that might work. Now, I'm not going to care what happens around the outside. All I'm thinking about is what's going to look good around here. So a bit of shadow, I might cook it more than I would. Open up the blacks a bit. Because it's getting flatter, I'll add in a little bit of contrast and also some clarity so it's not too flat. Now I'm only looking in this area. I don't care it's messed up my highlights or it's messed up the background. It's going to do its job there. So now what I want to do is right click and say clear the mask. Now very important, that will only obliterate my mask, but it will keep those adjustments that we've dialed in carefully using our eyes that we think are going to do a good job. So let's say clear mask. The shot is going to darken down again because it's got rid of the mask, but we've still got those underlying adjustments. Now we can grab our brush, go over to our subject, and think about what flow does. Now, if we do this without flow, we're back in the same situation, that we're either masking or not masking. And now it looks a bit fake, it's too bright where the grass is and so on. So that's not much good. So let's clear that mask again. Now what we're going to do is drop our flow right down. And this is one of the best parameters of using the brush because it now makes everything much more flexible. Essentially what flow does is allow you to build up the adjustment per brush stroke. So with a flow of around 4, think of that as percentage. So if you think if I just drag my pen or mouse, whatever you're using, doesn't matter. If I drag my pen across the image, it will do 4% of all those combined sliders. So just a little bit. If I drag back again, another 4% and so on. So like painting with a dry brush on a wall, then it's going to build up that adjustment. Now the greater the flow, the faster it's going to build up. But let's keep it nice and low. And now we're just going to brush. I'm going to make that a bit smaller. We're just going to brush in those areas. And the nice thing is it's happening before my eyes, but it's very gradual. So at the point you think that looks better, then we can stop. Now you might be thinking, well, that hasn't made any difference, David, but if we turn off, let's just bring the layers out. If we turn off our adjustment layer, you can see before and after like so. So it's subtle, but excuse me, we're all about subtlety, of course. Now, as I said before, or like we did with our tuner, then if we want to lift up any other areas, then we've made ourselves like a brush which we can open up any other shadows wherever else we want to. So that's a far more accurate way to gradually build up your adjustments without it looking fake and so on. All right, simple example there. Let's have a quick look at your floods of questions. Let's see. I'm just gonna have a look in the webinar room, which is extremely busy. Let's see. Says window open. Diego's doing a fine job for answering all the questions. I'll just pick out a general one. Chris says, David, you use a tablet for layers. Yes, and you can see that if we just bring up the overhead cam. Do you need to use a tablet for layers? No. Does it make it easier? I personally think so, yes. Mostly because we're actually drawing. So look, that's rather handy placement of Bear versus Wacom. So if we just clear that mask again, like so, and we're back here, we've got our nice low flow. We're pretty much drawing. So I can do an action like that much more naturally than I could do with a mouse trying to do the same thing. I find it difficult and uncomfortable with a mouse. If you're used to drawing on paper, painting with a pen or whatever, then it's much, much easier. So I personally find it more comfortable and so on, but it's not essential. If you don't want to spend the money on a tablet, and equally you don't have to buy pro versions or whatever, the cheapest Wacom works super nice as well, but please don't feel you have to. It's not necessary. There's tons of people out there who do masking just with a mouse, so yes. Let's say, okay, I'm going to leave my colleagues to do their best on the questions as well. That's a good question from Vivian, actually, a timely one. If you've done a few layers, how do you bring them together? Don't confuse with how layers work in Capture One with Photoshop. Because we're working on the raw data, we're never actually changing the pixels in the file, it's just a set of instructions. So we don't ever have to collapse the set of layers. So we have a maximum of 16 layers, which I didn't mention before. So you can't go beyond 16 layers, but generally that's enough. But you don't have to collapse them or combine them. When we export to TIFF, JPEG or whatever, that's when we see our result. But the raw file will always keep those stack of layers. Oh, good comment from Michael that came in. Show the flow with the grayscale mask, you can see the change directly. Yeah, so if we turn on our, spoiler alert, that was for later, Michael. If we turn on our grayscale mask, you can see exactly how the mask is much more subtle. So the white areas are where the mask is at its maximum. The gray areas just next to my finger here, that's where it's less subtle. So allowing the adjustment to be much more subtle. Okay, so let's move on to another shot. Let's turn our mask off and let's think about a similar kind of thing, but let's bring, you know, a few more adjustments together as well. So on this shot, let's talk about dodging and burning, a similar thing. So I'm going to reset my layers. So we've got a shot here, which works great. Base exposure is nice. Don't want to brighten it. Don't want to darken it at all. The subject, the plate just next to me, and the thingies. Someone who's more versed in Indian culture than me will know much better what's going on here. But the fire's a little bit dark, so I want to lift that up. So similar, you know, quandary as before. If I, let's just reset the highlights. If I pull up shadows, or if I pull up the blacks, it just washes out and doesn't look good. It's not a good adjustment for this shot. Shadows, it has too much of a global effect. But let's bring a few different adjustments together. So workflow as before, make a new field adjustment layer. Again, that can be a shortcut if you do something like that regularly. Just a keyboard shortcut. We can set that up in edit keyboard shortcuts. Again, I won't use them in the webinar because it's hard for you to follow. Okay, we should also name our layers so we know what the heck's going on. So I'm going to call that fire. Did I fill my layer? Yes, M on the keyboard just to make sure. And we're going to look at this area and think, okay, I want to pull up shadows. I want to open up the blacks a bit. Let's just go to my Luma curve and we just add a little bit of contrast too. And as we've got some nice red flames, let's up the saturation a bit as well. So that's a good adjustment for this area. So if we turn that off and on, it's doing quite nicely. But once again, I want to clear my mask so it does not affect anything else. Grab my brush and then with a low flow, once more, nice and low, we can just brush this in and then it will gradually appear. And like, sorry, I forget your name, regarding the grayscale mask, yes, you could have the grayscale mask active and watch that, but I also prefer to watch the photo to see exactly what's going on. So now we can open up this area. If we turn that layer off and back on again, then it's just pulled that little area up a bit. Or if we want to open up some detail back here, then we could do the same as well. So I can brush that anywhere I like to open up those adjustments. Similarly with dropping the highlights down, if we go back to the background layer and pull down our highlights, that works for those, but it also darkens the plate. If we pull down the whites, it also has an effect on the plate. So once again, if we wanted to be really critical, we would just do exactly the same workflow. Fill your layer, adjust this area to as we see fit and brush in that adjustment. All right, quick check on the questions. Let's see. And then painting on. Why not? That's actually a good timely question which just threw in. Why not erase the mask from where we don't need it instead of clearing it and then painting on? The reason why I do that, Jitendra, was so we can stop at the point where we think it looks good. We could also erase, but if you imagine in this situation, I'm only brushing in this little bit, I'd have to erase all of that stuff, which would take longer than shortcutting clear mask, brushing where I want to have it. So I think that's faster personally, but there's nothing to stop you. Like if you wanted the whole shot apart from a little bit, then it would be faster to erase. And with your erase brush, you can still use a flow control and erase gradually. So that works as well. Okie dokie, let's move on to another aspect. So we've looked at using flow. Keep that in mind. I personally have stopped using opacity. I always keep opacity at 100 because flow gives me the control to bring in the adjustments where I need it to and then stop. Now opacity, that's a blend of the two. Opacity means you can just cap your maximum opacity. But again, I don't think that's really necessary because like on the fire example here, I can't think, oh, I want to cap that at 80%. That's probably going to be about right. There's no way I could pre-visualize that as an example. What I can do is if I feel I went too far with my adjustments, I can pull the opacity back down and then we can blend that exactly as we wish. So for me, the opacity is kind of null and void now, but I know some people, if you're using a mouse, who struggle with flow, if you have a low opacity, then you can click drag, click drag, click drag, which does a similar thing. But for me, flow works best. All right, so we've done bare. Let's talk about a radial mask, gradient mask. So there's a couple of little hidden tidbits and features in there that you need to know about. So simple shot here, also from Alaska. Hi to the person from Alaska who said hello earlier. Sorry, I missed that. Typical shot here. I'm just going to lift the overall exposure a tad so we can see a bit more in the hills. But what if we want to just concentrate in exposure with a nice graduation on the sky, as an example? We could draw it in manually, but it's very hard to do that nice perfect feather as if you'd put, you know, a filter in front of the lens, a gradient filter in front of the lens. So we can mimic that digitally as well. So if we grab our gradient filter brush down here, draw linear gradient mask on our tooltip, shortcut key L, and draw down, then we're going to see 3 lines in the shot like so. So what do those 3 lines mean? If I press M so we can see our mask, it will help to illustrate. But very simply, the top line is 100%, so that's maximum mask. By the time we've got down to the center line, we are at 50%. By the time we've got to the third line, we've faded off to 0. So 150, 0. So it's a complete, you know, linear fall off like so. So if we keep it like this as my linear fall off for now, press M to hide the mask. Now we can throw in a bit more contrast. We could drop our brightness down. We could add some clarity, pull down the blacks and the shadows so we get some darker clouds and so on. And that's only happening in that graduated area. Now the good news is this kind of mask, it's a dynamic mask which we can easily go in and change it retrospectively. So if I press M on my keyboard once more, just to remind you, that's how a mask looks. There's nothing to stop me grabbing one of these lines and you'll see the image change behind it, like so, and change it. Now, what if we don't want that perfect fall off from 150 to 0? Using shortcut key, so Option Alt, this one down here. If we hold down my Option Alt key and grab the bottom line, we can then make it asymmetrical, so no longer symmetrical. So if we press M on the keyboard, you can see that fall off is much sharper now. So if we pull that down, we can actually make it super sharp if you wish. So have a very fine cutoff like so. Generally it helps if it's got a little bit of gradation on it. It just makes the mask much more flexible. Equally, in this situation, it works best if our mask is horizontal. But that's not always the case. So if we hover over the center line, you see the cursor changes to the little snail or rotation arrow, and then we can actually tilt our mask whatever way we want. If you hold down Shift, then it will lock it to horizontal or vertical. So if you want to make sure it's absolutely perfect, you can hold down Shift and it will snap to those areas. So there's our gradient mask. And what if you're thinking, you know what, I'd just like to punch a little bit of a hole in it, which is perfectly acceptable. Or if we wanted to knock a little hole out in the mountain here or on this side, is it possible to do that? So you think, sure, I can do that. I'm gonna just have a look at my mask, grab my eraser, and then I'm gonna erase here. Oh, I get an error message. What does that mean? It says, do you want to rasterize the mask? So this operation requires the mask to be rasterized. So simply what that means, if you remember, this mask is dynamic, so I can always go in and retrospectively change it. So I can't brush a bit more onto it, I can't erase some of it until I rasterize it. So you can either start to try to erase and say rasterize, or you can right click and say Rasterize Mask. And what that will do is kind of rubber stamp it where it is right now, as if I'd painstakingly drawn it by hand. So if I say rasterize, it's now perfectly possible to grab my erase brush and then knock a hole in that mask like so. Obviously with a lot more finesse and creativity than that, but now it becomes editable. Can't speak today. Okay, so gradient masks, super handy, very versatile. Another little word of warning, if you've drawn a gradient mask and you think, you know what, I'd like to have one at the bottom as well, we could easily think, well, let's darken the sky down, let's lift up the shadows. You can only have one gradient mask per layer. So if I try and draw another one, it's going to wipe out the existing one. So if you do want to have two, just make yourself another layer and draw yourself another gradient. So now I can easily have those two gradients like so. Alrighty. Quick little look at questions. See in the chat you're helping each other out. That's great. Makes my job much easier. Good one from Rob actually. Can you copy adjustments to a different layer? So yes, you can. It's just, oh, is that copy layers to a different adjustment? Can you copy adjustments to a different layer? You can duplicate layers, but you can also, if we apply a layer, you can apply adjustments from a style, which might help you. Just thinking of your question. So if you've loaded up a layer, you can apply an adjustment from a style. You can't copy one set of adjustments from one layer to another. You can copy layers from one photo to another photo by using the copy and apply button up the top here. You can also, if we just make another layer, you can also copy masks from one layer to another. So if you want to duplicate the mask, say if you've got one mask which is doing noise reduction and you want to keep that separate, and you've got another mask that's going to do sharpening and you want to have different opacity values, then to save you drawing it twice, you can just copy that mask as an example. So good question. All right, so similar to gradient masks is radial mask. So let's do a bit more of an extensive photo edit with this gentleman. So we're throwing some basic adjustments, we'd do a radial mask, and we do a bit of skin tone adjustments as well on his face, which also requires a mask. Before we do that, actually a good question from David. Can you copy the gradient mask and then invert it? Yes. So if you invert the gradient mask, it's going to flip it. So if you draw your gradient mask and think, actually, I know it's going to be the other way around, but it's easier to draw it in that direction and then flip it, yes, you can invert it just with a right click as well. Oh, oops, I meant copy the mask into a new layer and then invert the mask. Yes, you could do that as well. Absolutely. No problem at all. So don't worry about your oops. All right, let's edit this gentleman. So first of all, this is as it came, almost as it came out of camera. A little bit dark, so we need to brighten it or do something with it. So I would pull exposure a bit, but not too much, because exposure is going to brighten his surfboard as well, and I want to retain the highlight detail that we've got in there. So I'm going to stop at that point, move on to brightness, which is just going to lift up the midtones and not affect the highlight so much. So now we've got a better base adjustment. I'm also going to throw in a crop, so we can get rid of the cabinets over on the right hand side. This is a GFX 50, so we've got plenty of resolution to play with, like so. And let's throw in a bit of saturation. Actually, we'll warm it up a tiny bit as well, and we can have some clarity, a nice mid-tone contrast. So that's a pretty good base adjustment, but the first thing I want to do with the radial mask is just a vignette, essentially. Now, why would we use a radial mask when we have a vignette tool? Good question, David. The Vignette tool here works great, but there's no way you can change it or finesse it. So all it's doing is a kind of a brightness adjustment, like so. But you can't really control the shape of it. You've got no control what it's actually doing in terms of adjustments, but it can work very, very nicely. But if you want more control, then it makes more sense to use the Radial Mask. Now the Radial is similar to the Gradient. It's got its own cursor tool. Again, shortcut T, reminding you from the tooltip. So it's got its own cursor tool and it's dynamic, so we can go back and edit it. If I pop the cursor on the center, when I start to draw, it will expand out from the center. So where you start drawing should be roughly where you think you want the center of your vignette. You can always move it, but just for efficiency, that works quite nicely. So if I start drawing from the center, you will see my Radial Mask burst out, and I can reposition it just by dragging anywhere in the center. These little handles allow me to squash it and change its shape, like so. I can spin it by hovering in the center line and then rotating. And of course we can change the feathering by just moving it around like so. So there's my Radial. Now, as soon as I come off the viewer, it'll disappear so I can see what my mask is looking like. I'm going to press M to hide the mask, and now we can decide what we want to do. So as I said, with the Vignette tool, has limitations on what we can do, but now we can do anything. We could use exposure, we could use brightness, we could use the curves, we could use a combination of a whole bunch of different tools. So I generally don't use exposure for the Vignette because down here we've got some shadows. So if I pull exposure down, then the shadows get too dark very quickly. So what we are aiming to do is either use brightness just to pull the midtones down a bit, or exercise full control with the Luma mask, because that won't affect our color, and then we can decide exactly what we want to darken. So I want to pull down the brighter tones a bit, also the midtones a little, but I don't want to block up my shadows, so we just give that a little lift and give ourselves a nice subtle Radial Mask. Now if I want to move it, no reason why I can't, I can just move the radial around and then the adjustments will follow with it quite nicely. Same applies with the Gradient Mask. If we wanted to knock a hole out of it or brush a bit in, then we'd have to rasterize it first. But you don't have to rasterize it if you're just going to leave it as its default Radial Mask. By the way, before anyone asks the question, when you draw a radial, it always starts with the mask on the outside. If you want the mask in the middle, then going back to David's question about inverting, there's nothing to stop us inverting this as well. So we can do an invert mask. Same, David, if you are on your gradient, or if you right click at any point, you'll see a little option here which is draw mask inside, if you always prefer to have the mask in the center of the radial. Another thing you can do, you can grab the outside one and snap it over the middle, and then it will invert like so. But let's keep our nice soft mask. So there's our nice Radial Mask. Kids, don't forget to name your, whoops, and don't forget to learn how to spell. Don't forget to name your mask. So if we turn that off, you can see what it's doing. A nice subtle one. Again, opacity is your friend. If you think, oh, I've overdone that a bit much, because we could even introduce another adjustment like just desaturate the outside slightly. Again, we can go all the way from 0 to hero on our maximum 100 or somewhere in between like so. Good question from Claude actually. Can you expand the Radial Mask outside of the frame? You can actually see this one is outside. So if I just turn on my proof view for a second, we can go way outside the edge like so. So as long as you've got screen real estate, then yes, you can pull that outside as much as possible. Good question, Claude. All right, so I said I wanted to do a little bit of skin fixing as well, just to even up the tones a bit. So we can see we've got a mismatch of tones, a bit more redness on the nose, a little bit on the head and so on. So once again, combining layers with the color adjustment allows you to be much more subtle. Again, I would do the same technique of filling the layer, dialing in my adjustments, and then deciding where I want to put it. So if we were to do that, click and hold, new filled adjustment layer. So that's over the whole shot, like so. Go to my skin tone tab in the advanced color editor, and I want to grab this picker and pick on a desirable skin tone, so a target skin tone. If you want to watch this tool in more depth, go back 1 week, either on YouTube or on our Learning Hub, and then watch the webinar about color, because we cover this in a bit more detail as well. So I want to pick my target skin tone, so I'm going to go down here because it's a nice warmer, richer tone. And Capture One gives me or shows me the skin tone I picked with that dot, and also a range. And that range is going to be the range of colors that are going to be compressed, or I would say adjusted to that target. So I want to catch as many of those bad colors as possible. So let's expand this out. And you'll see when I pull hue across, all the colors are going to drop into line for my target color. So if I pull hue across, see how his nose changed, and then saturation and lightness, you'll see everything flatten off, which we don't want to do because there's some nice modeling. Now, right now, you could ask, well, what's the point of doing this on a layer if it's a skin tone adjustment? But this coily spring over here is too close to the skin tone to not be affected. So if we turn this layer off, then you can see it's also damaging that. So if we zoom back into his skin, right click and say clear mask, grab my brush. It's going to be huge, so let's make it a bit smaller. And now we can just brush in, again with a low flow, because we can finesse it. So if we only want to have a little bit of skin tone adjustment, we do a few brush strokes. If we want to have more skin tone adjustment, then we do more, and so on. A little bit on his chin, down by the side of the face here, and just across the neck should probably do it like so. So now if we turn this layer off, that's before and after, like so. So just to clean that up. If we do our before and after, it's going to be fairly dramatically different just because we had our exposure boost as well. But if we look at our layers before and after, option click, before and after, like so. Simple, subtle, but works quite nicely. Good question from Hari Prasad. Any chance so many layers lag the system? Potentially. Very system dependent. The reason why it's a maximum of 16 is for performance reasons. So if we added more layers, it's kind of a balance between keeping good performance and flexibility. 16 is a pretty good number. It's very rare to max out on that. But yes, you might see a slowdown, depending on the size of your megapixels as well. So like this shot here, which I didn't edit. So this is 100 megapixel, and we've got three layers. Similar thing going on with the skin tone. But you know, my Mac's still pretty responsive, and I'm live streaming to 3 destinations at the same time and so on. So it shouldn't be too laggy if you have a decent machine. All right, quick question look. So you're answering each other as well in the webinar room. That's great. And Diego's answering like a crazy man as well. So I think you guys are pretty much well covered with various questions. Yeah, cool. All right. If I see any more common ones, I'll pick some up, but don't want to get off subject too much. Okay, how are we doing for time? 15 minutes, great. Bit more than I thought we had. So let's look at heal and clone first of all, because that's a really important aspect of working with layers as well. And healing and cloning is two very different things, but also have very different uses. So let's look at healing first of all. So we'll open this shot. This is from Phil Penman out in New York. Let's reset the layers that we did earlier. And we can also look at this one from John once again, but let's go to seagulls first of all. So healing and cloning works on a layer. Same rules apply. You can still drop opacity. You can still use flow and so on if we wish, and we're going to use flow when we clone as well. Very simply put, healing is good for getting rid of dust spots, marks, blemishes, and pesky seagulls as an example. So if we grab our healing mask, Q on your keyboard as a shortcut, move over onto the photo, that's too big, so I'm going to drop down the size. And then as we draw on the shot, you'll see a mask, and then straight away, Capture One will pick a source point and get rid of that object. Now there's no limit to the number of points that we want to have. So if I want to get rid of pesky seagull number 2, I can do so. Doesn't have to be a uniform shape. So if we get rid of this guy, then Capture One will pick that spot and so on. Now, if you're not happy with the spot that Capture One has picked, there's nothing to stop you picking it up and moving somewhere else, and then Heal will blend the luminosity in quite nicely. These arrows will remain visible on the screen until you hover off the viewer. So you can always have a quick check to see how it's looking and come back. We can turn them off, which we'll get to in a minute. Now the shortcut for changing brush size comes into its own when you have to do a lot of healing. So this is a chewing gum street. So let's get rid of that layer. Let's get rid of that layer, like so. So now we've got all the chewing gum, which we want to get rid of. So that's a lot of healing to do. When we grab our healing brush, if no healing layer exists already in our layer stack, as soon as we start to heal, then Capture One will make you a heal layer for you, just to save you a step. Now we can go ahead, let's just zoom in, sorry. Now we can go ahead and just bust out the spots that we need to. And this is where the handy shortcut really comes into its own, because right clicking to change the size for bigger and smaller points is too slow. So if I need to make my brush smaller, I can just use that 2-finger shortcut, Control Option, like so. Make it a bit smaller, and then bust, make it a bit bigger, bust this one, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, and so on. So small objects, large objects, you can do all kinds of funky stuff with healing, but using that shortcut will make the action much faster. Now when it comes to cloning, so healing, just to define the difference, healing will match the luminosity as you saw with the seagulls. So it's not a like for like copy of pixels. It will do a bit of luminosity blending at the area that you've removed, so it looks nice and natural. Cloning is just a like for like pixel copy, but not forgetting you can use flow and opacity, or you can drag the opacity slider down as well to modify it. But it is a like for like pixel copy with no luminosity blending. So a couple of examples. Let's just go to this gentleman. Let's get rid of that layer. One example where I find myself using it quite a lot is for adding a second catch light. So we've just missed the catch light in his eye here. So it looks a bit odd to only have one catch light. So it's easy just to grab that and stick it on his eye here, rather than having to go through a whole Photoshop round trip process just for that one, silly action. So cloning is a like for like copy. So we're going to grab our clone brush, and this time, actually I'll show you before. So let's just zoom in a bit bigger. So we're going to go to our source point, but this time we have to tell Capture One, I want to copy from this point. The heal is automatic, whereas clone, it's manual. So once again, Option key down on your keyboard, hold, and then click on the spot that we want to copy from. So if I tap here, now I get that orange circle, which I hope you can see. And now I can go to where I think would be a good spot for a catch light. And I've got my flow down a little bit lower so I can build up the brightness, and then we can start brushing. Now the annoying thing is that arrow gets in the way and I can't see what I'm doing. So what I would recommend when you're cloning, so you can see what's going on, right click and turn off display arrows. You can also shortcut that if you wish. So now I can go back and then just build up my catch light a little bit more, get in that second bit and stop there. And again, if it's too bright, we can pull opacity down to virtually nothing, or pull it back probably around there is a good match, like so. So now we've added our catch light just by stealing it from the other eye, which is a good improvement, I think. So that's one use I found for cloning. It's quite handy. Sometimes it's just a case that cloning works better than healing, depending what you're doing. So if we wanted to get rid of this light, let's try healing. So I'm going to grab my heal brush. Let's make that a bit bigger and then just try to heal this point out. See what Capture One does. Not bad, actually. Let's bring the arrows back so we can see where it picked it from. There was a question from Laura. It was, how do you eliminate just one healing spot? So what you need to do, Laura, is tap on it until it turns orange and then hit backspace on your keyboard and then it will eliminate it. Okay? But do make sure that it's actually selected. Now, another thing you can do when it's selected is that you can use your cursor keys, up, down, left, right, just to nudge this little circle up and down. So using your cursor keys, if you need to just move that ever so slightly, then it will just jog it by a little tiny amount. Because sometimes when you're moving it by a big amount, then it's not quite so easy. But using the cursor keys, then it just moves it by a little teeny amount. Now, what Heal has done here is not bad, but it's actually pretty good until I let go. And then when the luminosity blending goes in, it's looking at the clouds and it's making this bit too bright. So sometimes clone just works better. So if we grab clone, now I need to set my source point. Let's make that a bit bigger. Set my source point with an option click as before, and I'm going to try and just brush in the same spot. And I've got flow set to a little bit lower so that I can just decide when to stop so I don't go too far. And if I need to erase, because I've probably done that a bit too much, bring my flow down, and I can just erase a little bit, again too much, grab my brush and then just fill that in a bit more as well, like so. So sometimes clone just works a little bit better, sometimes Heal works better. Just have a little experiment. But I found cloning for eye catch lights is just a really good use case. Alrighty, how are we doing for time? 8 minutes left. Good, we are racing through it. It's because there's so many questions, I'm just a bit overwhelmed about what to answer. So let's have a look at a little bit of questions and see how we're doing. Let's have a look. Quite a few questions about shortcuts I saw coming in. Martin was asking why not make the filled layer default. I think that's a good argument for a shortcut. So let's just direct you to where shortcuts are, and then that way we should be good. Okay, so edit keyboard shortcuts. They are somewhere in this list. To save you the hassle of looking for them, just type layer, like so. So we can see shortcuts for add new empty adjustment layer, add new filled layer. So Martin, that would be a good use case for you. So add a shortcut for new filled layer, and then to stop you having to navigate to the layers tool, you can just punch your shortcut key. Also, if you're into using something like, actually I just put it back in its box to tidy up its desk. Let's just pull out this guy for a second. Here's one I prepared earlier, hang on. This is just one of many different kinds of consoles you can buy for exercising shortcuts in Capture One. So I will do a live on this separately, but this is from Monogram. You can see the nice pretty box, Creative Console. It used to be called Palette Gear, they've now changed, but this has like a number of buttons and also dials and sliders that you can bind to Capture One. So then these three buttons here, this would be great for add new layer, add filled layer, and so on. Add new heal layer or whatever, or delete layer, or go to background as one of the shortcuts that you can see on the screen. So there's a few kits out here like this that work particularly nicely, but this one happens to work very nicely with Capture One, as does the panels from Tangent and a few others. Also, there's nothing to stop you using something like, a USB keypad if you want to add a few shortcuts. This gadget under here, which we can just about see, this is what I use to, switch scenes when we're live broadcasting, but there's no reason why you can't add a bunch of shortcuts to that as well. And then also, new layer, filled layer, pick my brush, all that kind of stuff. So if you really get into layers, it does kind of make sense to work with those shortcuts as well, because it's not the fastest to go ahead and do click new field adjustment layer. Much faster if you can use a shortcut as well. Okay, so let me just check where we got to. So we looked at our dodging and burning, we looked at our gradation, color grading we can look at, we did skin tones, we did a bit of sharpening, we did heal and cloning, dodge and burning. Oh, that was just, this is a good example of two different ways you could approach something. And again, using gradients in a slightly less conventional way. So if we grab our gradient tool, we can drag our gradient tool from the right. If we press M on our keyboard to see the mask, we probably don't want it bleeding that far across. So if I hold my option key, I can just make it a slightly stronger fall off, like so, purely because this side is a bit bright. And then I could bring my highlights down a touch and my brightness like so, just to even it up. Equally, what we can also do, and this is a very good example because of this darker window in the back as well, where we can tune the adjustment so that our brush becomes a little bit intelligent. So once again, if we add our new field adjustment layer, so M on my keyboard, that's everywhere. Looking at this shot, if we pull down the brightness and we pull down the highlights, but I would actually then open up the shadows, or at least the blacks, so we're not affecting this area at the back. So when I brush, I don't have to be super accurate. So now if I right click and say clear mask, grab my brush, make this nice and big, relatively low flow. I'm not worried too much about kind of brushing into this area because my brush actually is programmed or tuned not to affect those areas. So again, this is another reason why you don't necessarily have to be too picky about your brush. And I'm not even worrying too much about her dress because that's probably not being affected as well. So now if we turn our adjustment layer on and off, you can see where it's doing its business, but it's not killing our shadows. So fine tuning the brush to work nicely in your image works well. Okay, let's finish off by having a quick look at a luminosity mask, because this is a pretty cool way that you can build masks. And it also has a feature in there which allows you to shape the mask in a way, which you can do with any mask, but we just haven't had a chance to cover it yet. Okay, so shot here, very extreme ranges of light. So we've got a nice bright beach and then the darker canopy underneath. Now the exposure of this and the contrast and everything is kind of spot on. But what if I want to do a little bit more work on this area? Maybe I want to brighten it, add some more contrast, whatever. So whatever I do, of course, I'm always going to affect the canopy as well, especially with exposure. If I pull the highlights down, that's pretty targeted. But once again, if I wanted to throw in a bit of contrast or something, then it would be very difficult to do it. Now this has a very defined edge. So to try and manually mask around that would be very laborious, unfortunately. But the good news is that we can ask Capture One to make us a mask based on the luminance values of the shot. Now, very important to appreciate this is that you have to give Capture One something to work with. So you can't just say, hey, Capture One, make me a mask which just does the highlights. You actually have to present a mask to Capture One and then say, cut out the shadows, cut out the highlights, only show me the midtones or whatever. So the easiest way to do that, again, is with our good old friend, New Field Adjustment Layer. So if we press M on our keyboard, we see that mask. And then spoiler alert earlier where we talked about grayscale masks, we're going to turn on our grayscale mask as well. Display, let's try that again. There is actually a little visual bug sometimes. There we go. So Option M is your shortcut for the grayscale mask. So why has the image disappeared? Because now we're not seeing the photo, we're only seeing the mask represented. White means that maximum masking, black means no masking. So now what we can do is press the Loom Arrange button and ask Capture One to restrict that mask. So it's already doing something, but I want all the highlights, and we want to cut out the shadows. So that's the canopy over the top. So the more of these shadows we cut out, the more it goes to black until we get too far, and then we start to lose some of the beach. So I need to back that off a little bit as well and say, okay. So now we've got a mask which is just on the beach area. So if we come out of that, attempt to come out of that. Did say there was a little visual glitch. There we go. So now our mask is just on the beach like so. So I can pretty much have a free hand to do anything. We could drop our highlights, or we can make it higher key if we wanted to. We could add a bit of contrast. You get the idea. We're now free to edit here. Now, the only thing you have to be aware of when you're creating luminosity masks is that sometimes the edge can be a little bit on the binary side. So if I zoom in even closer, so you see it's a little bit crunchy. So sometimes if you're making more extreme edits, that doesn't look very pleasant. Fortunately, Loom Arrange is dynamic, so we can always go back in and tweak it. By default, this slider radius is at 0, which means the sensitivity slider has no effect. And what the sensitivity slider does is really fine tune how the edges look. So if we bump up the radius to a certain amount, then straight away you can see an improvement on the edges. So radius will decide to what extent Capture One will analyze from the edge moving either side of the mask. So if I back this off, then you can see it shrink, and if I make it bigger, you can see it expand. So we need to balance it to around here. And sensitivity controls how the mask handles the edges. So if we go to 0, that's going to feather the mask. So it's just going to soften it right off. If we go to 100, that's going to refine the mask and snap to the edges. So it depends what kind of mask you're looking to achieve. Do you want a super fine mask, or do you want a soft fluffy mask? So I'm going to go somewhere around here and say apply. And then that simply means that the edge of that mask is just really a little bit nicer. So it's just a more believable mask, and it's got the finesse to fit around these fronds and so on. Otherwise we get some weird edge artifacts. And of course you can always go back in and tweak it if you wish. Now, any other mask you can also treat in the same way. So if I just draw a mask for a second, let's do it on a new layer. So if I just draw a rough old mask here, let's go full flow. Rough old mask like so. I can always go in and say feather, and that will, sorry, if I go maximum, that would just soften it off. That's quite a good tool to use if you've drawn a mask and thought, you know what, I wish I'd done it softer. Rather than deleting it and doing it all over again, just apply a little bit of feathering. What you can also do with the refine mask is, if we zoom in a little bit, if you've tried to edge around something, I don't know if it will be successful on this. Let's try. So if I draw crudely around this, and then I right click and say refine mask, what's going to happen if we bust that up? So you see Capture One will try and stick it to those edges. What I would actually do is draw that even finer, and then the mask will suck down to those edges. So you can still use those tools with any other mask. They're not exclusive to the Luminosity Mask, but they can be very useful when creating the Luma masks. All right, I think that takes us up pretty much to bang on, actually not bang on, slightly over an hour. The only thing we didn't really get to talk about is color grading, but that was spoken about in last week's session about color. So do pick that up if you wish, but I think we pretty much covered everything we could. Now there really is, we could talk for another hour about layers if we wanted to, in the various different use cases of them. But I hope what you've seen today is just a little bit of inspiration on how you could go further, especially with your own work as well. Let's just look at a few more questions. I think Diego's been a champ and Yulia as well. Rudolph was saying, have we done a seminar on sharpening? We haven't actually, so it's probably long overdue that we should do that. So that would actually be a good thing, even if it's just covered in a quick half-an-hour session. Den says, brilliant, that answers my question on bird outlining a mask. Yeah, there's actually, Den, if you look back in the Capture 120 quick live sessions on YouTube, there is an edit of a kingfisher where I do just that. I do a rough mask around the kingfisher and then refine, and then it just hugs those edges much, much nicer. So it's a good way to do that. Let's see. I think, because of thanks to my awesome colleagues, it's been pretty well answered. What is Jan saying? If you create a mask out of a color, you can choose in the advanced color editor. Is there any way to edit that layer with the brush, so I need better eyesight, and affect other colors than the colors you took for the mask? Yeah, so what Jan is talking about is that we can, do we have a good subject? Probably not. But if I click on my advanced color editor, let's go to my background layer, let's just choose the flamey stuff. And we say create mask layer from selection. Capture One's going to make a mask based on those colors. So if I press M on my keyboard, it's picked out everything in that color range. So yeah, and what you need to do is just grab your brush and then you can just add to that mask. So if I wanted to include this bit, there's nothing to stop me doing that as well. So yeah, it's totally possible. If you want to know more about that trick that we just did, which was create mask layer from selection, that just takes the color range, converts it to a mask, super useful, then watch last week's session as well. Okay, everybody, if you want to come back for more, if you're thirsty for more, then the next session will be on, trying to remember, we've got a full-length webinar next Thursday, which is about tips and tricks for working on batches. So that's anything from the import process to editing to exporting. I can't remember off the top of my head if there's a live session on Tuesday afternoon just on YouTube. There might be, but if you go to YouTube, look at the live broadcast playlists on Capture One's channel. It's easy to find if you search for it. Then you'll also find the upcoming schedule for live broadcasts as well. They're always pinned there on that playlist, so you can always press the special button, subscribe to YouTube, click, and then that way you'll get a notification. So what will happen if you subscribe to YouTube and you ask for notifications half an hour before we're due to go live, you'll get a notification on your phone, or if you're logged into YouTube at the time. And then when we actually go live, which is roughly 10 minutes before the scheduled time, or 5 to 10 minutes, you'll get another notification as well. So that way you won't miss out on anything. Thanks for your time today. Sorry we couldn't answer every single question as it was rather busy, but thank you for your patience and bearing with my colleagues Diego and Yulia as well, who had the fast fingers on social media and helped us out as well. But I hope that was useful. Again, if you want to watch it, it'll just be on YouTube immediately after this is finished, and you can just rewind if you've missed any pieces. For those of you on YouTube who came from the webinar, sorry, the webinar itself did get very busy, crazy busy actually, so we ran out of seats there, so apologies for that, but glad you found us on YouTube as well. Take care everybody, enjoy your weekend when it arrives, and see you soon. Bye bye.